better and better on using beneficial insects, and that's really fun stuff. They do the work for you. Yeah.
Students are swarming to farms around the region for a new class offered at the University of Vermont that focuses on pollinators.
Honeybees are, first and foremost, the most important pollinators for agriculture. And as honeybees were starting to suffer a lot of issues with mites and there's fungus problems, nosema, and unexplained colony collapse disorder, people were starting to say, all right, we need to make sure we've got something else. What else do we have?
Jane Sorensen, a farmer herself, created the class in response to the growing interest from fellow farmers and landowners, as well as undergraduates.
It's a black plastic that's made out of a corn. The class is called Landscape Design for Pollinators, and it's really a mishmash of landscape design, as the title says, but focusing really on the habitat needs for pollinators.
We started getting more into the vegetables and a little out of the livestock.
With a mix of field trips, site visits, and time in the design studio, the class studies those habitat requirements in depth. They're focusing on both residential and small farm-scale projects. A number of farmers and homeowners from around the state are acting as clients, for whom the students will create specific landscaping plans.
It's becoming very important as people realize how vital pollinators are for our own survival. They pollinate all the flowering crops, pretty much everything we depend on for food, and so I think it's a very useful approach to landscape design, because as you design for pollinators, you're also designing for ecological functions.
And some of these other ones here, this golden variety that's got...
Pollinators are more than just bees and honeybees or bumblebees. That there are, there's a sweat bee, there's a squash bee that just pollinates for squash plants, which I had no idea things could be that specific. Hornets, wasps, yellow jackets, butterflies, ants, like everything can be a pollinator.
So right here would be the swimming area, and then it has a little waterfall at the end. I have a detailed drawing of that as well.
There are a lot of details for the students to think about as they make their designs, along with learning about a wide variety of insects and plants and how they interact with their surroundings. The students also need to have, or develop, the design skills to put their plans down on paper. Not to mention maintaining a relationship with clients while developing a landscaping plan.
A lot of the challenge with this design was, creating a really productive and interesting landscape that fosters foraging grounds for pollinators and habitat, but at the same time doesn't require the owners to put in too much more work, because the reality is they don't really have the time.
It was very, very daunting at first to, the first time after I met with them, having all these lists of things that eventually we would have, be going through and having to, come together with and come up with ideas. So I was definitely a little bit apprehensive about being able to do everything, because I'm also not a design-oriented person traditionally.
I would take the lawn and reseed it over with different types of clovers.
Because it's such a new field, there are limited resources for the students. So Professor Sorensen has started creating her own, compiling a list of Vermont plants for her students to refer to.
It's quite a complicated process. It involves flowering time for plants, the fruit they bear, how high they're going to grow, their soil requirements, sun or shade requirements.
I was aware of the difference between native plants and cultivars. When I was designing a habitat for butterflies, I knew I wanted all the plants to be true natives. This is a very important topic right now, particularly for farmers, because we have seen drastic declines recently in the last few decades in our native pollinator population. So red is not a very attractive color for bees.
Annie White is getting her PhD in plant and soil science at UVM. She's a teaching assistant for the class and also has a research plot at Sorensen's farm, where she's testing the pollinator attracting abilities of native versus non-native plants.
Honeybees are becoming much more expensive to keep because of all the disease problems. They're harder to get. And we have numerous species of native bees, which I think if we pay more attention to and we restore habitat for, that we can help encourage some of these bees back, and it can be a big benefit to farmers and be potentially more economically sustainable in the long term.
There's a wealth of information about the role and impact of some pollinators, particularly the European honeybee that many farmers rely on. There's much less information about the native species. Sorensen is hopeful that White's research will begin to answer some questions for farmers.
Would it make sense to actually take some land out of production and put it into habitat enhancement for pollinators? And would you see an increase in crops by taking land out of production? In Canada, there was a research that said taking 30% of the land out of production and putting it into habitat actually increased production.
For the bumblebee cycle, the queen emerges in the spring, lays her eggs, starts her nest, creates workers, they have a colony, and then towards the end of the season, like now, she starts producing young queens.
On this day, the class is on a field trip, starting in Jeffersonville at the farm between, where John and Nancy Hayden have been actively trying to attract pollinators to their fields for a number of years.
We're partners with the pollinators, so we're trying to uphold our end of the partnership by providing them habitat.
Along with making sure to have a variety of plants, the Haydens use a number of different techniques to support the pollinators.
We have nest boxes that we put up, and we're also making these mounds of our prunings and covering them with a little bit of soil to provide nesting habitat for bumblebees and places for the queens to overwinter. We've really seen our bee population improving over the years.
Maybe this color is more or less attractive than the purple. It's also a little bit more of a double flower.
White's research is ongoing, so it will be some time before she has final data. But she is seeing some trends and is hoping to provide planting recommendations to farmers and homeowners.
I think that the most important thing when we're trying to encourage our native pollinator populations to come back in our landscapes is trying to choose native flowers that are the most native to our area because they share an evolutionary history with these pollinators.
For now, White and Sorensen will continue to gather and share the information they do know. And these budding landscape designers will keep the interests of pollinators in mind.
Plants are the most essential part of designs. It's how we directly relate to the earth around us. They capture and filter water, they provide food, they provide habitat, fuel, so much part of our lives, and I think that this class really emphasizes the importance of that.
And these bushes are berry bushes.
If you're going to plant veggies, plant some flowers next to them, because to have them you have to draw them and you have to provide the food that they need, and it can't just be for that one period while your squash and your pumpkins are blooming. It's a season-long thing.
Improving pollinator populations is a topic that's generating a lot of buzz around Vermont. This new class at UVM is giving students the skills they need to design a future that's not just for the birds, but also for the bees. In Burlington, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.